3, 2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Mike Mussina, Hall of Famer, gives me a chance to reconnect with lots of folks. Now, I'm usually connecting with this guy about either golf, which he knows a lot more about than I do, college basketball, which he knows a lot more about basketball, but I'm really interested in, as well as his UMBC pursuits and Maryland pursuits of college basketball. But he once wrote a book with Mike Mussina as a centerpiece, and I figured he'd be a perfect guest to join us now to talk a little college basketball, a little Terps, but a whole lot of Mike Mussina. We welcome John Feinstein back on to discuss books. Man, you've written so many books in so many weird ways. It's not that I forgot about the Mussina book, but I remembered it pretty quickly, and I thought, I bet you got some great Mussina stories that didn't even make the book, man.
Well, maybe, Nestor. I'm not sure, but I very much enjoyed that year in 2007 when I wrote Living on the Black, which focused on Mike, as you said, and Tom Glavine, because I selected them, approached them, because they were two of the brightest athletes I'd known. I knew Mike not well, but well enough. I knew Glavine very well because I had covered his Braves teams back in 1992, 91, 92, 93 when they were so good. And I knew how smart they both were. And a book like that, you need guys who get why you're asking the questions you ask. And they were both willing. Mike a little more grudgingly than Tom because nothing's ever really easy with Mike. But they both did it, and I enjoyed the heck out of doing it because they were both such smart guys and good guys in different ways, but both good guys.
So I knew Glavine as well, and Glavine approached me. One of the All-Star games, 98, 99, earlier than that, when Mussina was up to get paid and took the hometown discount with Angelos. Glavine grabbed me, of all things, and it was a year when Mussina wasn't at the All-Star game, and said to me, "What's Mussina doing up there?" Total union thing, setting the tone for all of that. So so I had Glavine on every All-Star game. He was always there. Mussina was only there some of the time. Glavine was always 11-2 with a 2-7 at the All-Star break or whatever. But you really set, and Mussina and I, look, we were the same age. We were both single. We were both in the clubhouse every day. There was beer and concerts and Van Halen's, and I was a contemporary of him, but that era for those guys on the Union side of things, and having walked in '94 and Lords of the Realm, that dominated, beyond the pitching and beyond who was, it was a big part of a lot of conversations, especially in the aftermath of the strike, which was a war with the owners at every turn about money in a lot of cases.
Yeah, no, you're right. And Glavine and Mussina had lengthy conversations about that. Glavine was one of the leaders in the union, was not only one of the leaders when they struck in 94, but people forget was one of the leaders when they didn't strike the next time. He was one, because it came down at the bargaining table just before the deadline to a question about the luxury tax and where the luxury tax should be set. And the owners were dug in on one figure, the players were dug in on another figure. And from what I was told by Don Fear, who was still head of the union back then, it was Glavine who said, "Fellas, do we really want another walkout over this? Over, a few $1 million across the board for all 30 baseball teams?" And Glavine was kind of the peacemaker there, although he was a guy who was very vocal about players not giving hometown discounts because it repressed other salaries. And he and Mussina did talk about it on a number of occasions, and we're still discussing union issues because that was the year I did Living on the Black, was the year of the I forgot. I'm blocking out the name of the former senator who did the report on PEDs.
Mitchell report.
The Mitchell report. Thank you. I'm getting old.
We all are. I got that wisdom coming in too.
Within the union too, back in 2007.
John Feinstein joining us here. The book was Living on the Black. And, the Glavine Mussina thing, and I'll jump off here and let you, about all things Mussina and his entry, and we can get into Cooperstown and the value of all of it, but I want to focus on Mussina for a minute. Glavine was a hockey player who probably could have played in the NHL, at least believed he could have, and been all that. Mussina, however, was recruited to kick by Joe Paterno at Penn State, was a two-way basketball player, football player, the whole deal, went to Stanford, had all that going on, and actually turned down Edward Bennett Williams as some sort of legend has it at one point. I mean, Mussina had like some lore about being from Williamsport and growing up 5 miles from the Little League Hall of Fame and all that stuff. These were both special athletes in a lot of ways, not just in the way they thought about it, but they played sports in a way that modern kids don't, right?
Yeah, and Mussina's favorite sport was probably basketball. He loved to play basketball. He has a full court gym in his house, or not in his house, but on the property where he lives, and still lives up there in the middle of nowhere. I mean, getting there is like turn left at the end of the earth and drive another 50 miles, and you're almost there. But you're right. He was a 3-sport athlete and loved to play basketball, as I said. But went to Stanford, graduated in 3.5 years, obviously was a very high draft pick, and made it to the major leagues very quickly, and was a star right from the get-go in Baltimore, and was unbelievably consistent player. If you look at his career from 92 to 08, the only year he wasn't one of the best pitchers in baseball was 2007, which was the year I was doing Living on the Black, when at one point Joe Torre actually removed him from the Yankee rotation. And trust me when I tell you, it didn't help things in our relationship that he was pitching so poorly. I remember after one particular game, he got bombed on a Friday night by the Tampa Bay Rays at Yankee Stadium, got taken out in the 5th inning and given up 6 or 7 runs. And we were supposed to meet in the clubhouse the next morning to have one of our sessions, and I was pretty convinced he wasn't gonna want to do it, but I had to show up. So I got there, before the appointed time. I always like to be early, and Mike came in. He wasn't that late, but he came in late, and he walks across the clubhouse and kind of looks at me, and I said, I guess you're not thrilled to see me. And he said, you are about the last person in the world I want to see today. But then he sat and talked for an hour, and that was Mike could be cranky.
Oh, yeah.
I remember sitting with him at Shea Stadium when the Yankees were getting ready to play the Mets on a cold, rainy Saturday morning, and the Yankees were playing poorly. There were rumors that Torre was going to be fired. Mike wasn't pitching especially well. He'd been hurt. He'd had to miss a couple weeks, and his answers were a little bit what snappish, shall we say? And I looked at him finally. I said, you're not in a very good mood today. He said, we're in last place. My manager might be about to get fired. I've just been hurt. I'm pitching lousy. It's 50 degrees and raining out here. You expect me to be in a good mood? Well, and, of course, he was right.
He was honest.
But the thing about Mike was, even regardless of his mood, he always would patiently answer questions. And I've said this about him before. One of the things I really enjoyed about working with him was, of all the athletes I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot of them through the years, he would never answer a question as soon as you asked it. When you asked a question, he would sit there and think about it. And you had to get used to the fact that he would do that, because your tendency was think, did he not hear you, or is he upset about the question? But he was always thinking before he answered the question, and then he'd give you a really smart answer. There aren't that many athletes I've dealt with through the years. Glavine is another, who would give me answers, and I would sit there and think, I hadn't thought of it that way, because they're smarter than I am. And Mussina was definitely one of those guys.
Thoughtful, right? Like literally.
Absolutely,
thoughtful.
That's the word, thoughtful.
John Feinstein is here.
Cranky, too.
And competitive as hell, right?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, he remember, this is a guy whose fastball never went much above 90, and who pitched the last few years of his career rarely touching 90, but had so many pitches in his repertoire and was so competitive that in his last year as a major leaguer, he won 20 games.
Well, the other part of him, and I knew him as a young guy when he had the whole I mean, I was privy to the Hasselman brawl and the injury that happened after that. The night he took the line drive off his skull, all these, incredible things that he was a part of. Through all of that, the Oriole Yankee part of this, and maybe this is where we are in the modern. I mean, his brother Mark was my roommate. That's where we are in all of this. So I'm sitting in a bar on Tuesday night. I get the text that he's going in, and the first thought I have is, Well, he deserves it. If I had a ballot, I would vote for him. I would vote for Schilling, even though he wants to hang journalists. I would not vote for Bonds. I would not vote for Clement. But the immediate thing is such joy for him. And I went on and found an old picture he and I at Fenway Park, and I put it up. And I had blonde hair, whatnot, looked crazy. And then within a minute, the first comment from any Oriole fan is he going to wear an Oriole hat, right? Mm-hmm. Is it going to be Oriole or Yankee, which is always the eternal question. You've been around Baltimore long enough, John. I mean, I see you around town here. You know the deal, and you've been at it longer than I've been at it. This is the real high crime is how the hell he ever wound up with the Yankees and what it did to our city and what it did to our franchise. And very, very quickly, a guy who's been banned as a media member for 13 years, who probably should have a vote for the Hall of Fame because I've been doing this since 1986, that where we are in 115 losses in an empty city and all that. And I think, man, Mussina might have been right around the time all hell broke loose here, really, when you think about how he disappeared and under what circumstances. He was the guy who never wanted to leave the Orioles. That it's really kind of a dark tale for us. And then there's the whole, did he deserve to get in? Was Schilling going to get in? Are they going to let the steroid guys in? How the hell did Harold Baines get in? Then we go down the rabbit's hole of what is a Hall of Famer and the value of Cooperstown, and it kind of bums me out, John. I'll be honest with you. It really does.
Well, there's about 13 questions
of course.
in there, Nestor. So let me try to answer at least a couple of them. I mean, first of all, I think Mussina deserves to get in. I had a Hall of Fame ballot for I don't remember how many years, but the Washington Post decided at least 7 or 8 years ago now that we aren't allowed to vote for Halls of Fame, so I haven't had a ballot since then. But if I still had one, Mussina would definitely have been on my ballot from day one for his overall resume, his remarkable consistency through the years. As I said, he had one bad season. You look at the number of All-Star games he pitched in, and that's just a whole record. And let's remember that everything he did was in the American League East, which had more good hitters than any other division in baseball. And you're playing those teams, the Yankees, the Red Sox, or, the Rays were very good toward the end of his career, too, 18 times a year. And pitching in hitters' ballparks, Camden Yards certainly a hitter's ballpark. Yankee Stadium certainly a hitter's ballpark, especially when you're a right-handed pitcher. So I absolutely think he was deserving. I think Schilling is a little more borderline, won a lot fewer games, but maybe because of his postseason record deserves it. But to me, he's a debate. Mussina's not a debate. But as far as the whole Yankees-Orioles thing, knowing Mike as I do, and I think he might want to go in as an Oriole. It's where he started. He pitched more than half of his career in Baltimore, although it's close. He obviously was on very good Orioles teams, particularly in '96 and '97, and I think he has a warm spot for Baltimore. Now, the Yankees have treated him very well. He had a great deal of success with the Yankees. He never won a World Series in either place, but he was in World Series with the Yankees. And, of course, pitched in his most historic game, Nestor, was as a Yankee when he came in out of the bullpen for Clemens in Game 7 in '03. First relief pitch appearance of his entire life anywhere, and pitched 3 shutout innings and gave the Yankees a chance to come back and rally and eventually win the Aaron Boone game. But Mike's an iconoclast. I think he might want to go in as an Oriole, if only because being an Oriole means he's one of a much smaller group in the Hall of Fame than if he goes in as a Yankee.
Well, I've already said to everybody, if we ran buses up there, it's going to be the hill of Mariano Rivera anyway, right? So I said, no matter what any Oriole fan would think about whether the Yankees fan think he's a Yankee, and they will that day when he goes up there. But the larger picture of where the Orioles are and the bigger picture of where baseball is. I mean, you're up here for UMBC games. They built this beautiful facility down. They're trying to figure out how to fill it after winning the most unlikely game. By the way, no one ran the March Madness pool around the Orioles the way Mussina did. Just on March Madness.
Mussina was a huge, as you know, as I say, he loved basketball. He's a huge fan. There was a typo in the book at one point. Somebody, I don't know, copy editor wrote Cardinals instead of Cardinal. Uh-huh. And there were 12 other places in the book where it was right. It was a typo. But the only thing Mussina called me about on the book was that. And I said, Mike, it's a typo. Look at all, he said, you got to know the difference between Cardinals and Cardinal. I said, of course I know, Mike. I said, look at the other 12 references in the book. It's correct. there was a typo. It happens. And he said, oh, okay. He said, I thought maybe you just did it because you're a Duke guy. And no, I'm not going to put a mistake intentionally into one of my books because of where I went to college or where you went to college. But he was a very, as you know, very intense college basketball fan. And I remember how excited he was in '98 when Stanford made it to the Final Four and should have beaten Kentucky, lost to him in overtime.
Yeah, I went to March Madness games. I saw Duke play with him at the old St. Pete Dome down there. One of the years, like Marquette, Duke, a bunch of and Todd Froworth.
Marquette beat Kentucky that day.
Todd Froworth and Mussina. The Orioles were spring training down in Al Lang, and we literally got in a cab and went over from the Marriott down there at Al Lang. And the late great Todd Froworth, who was Mussina's best friend and college, they were best friends through basketball. Todd was a women's college basketball coach up in Milwaukee. John Feinstein joining us here. I want to tell you a funny story because I patterned my Purple Rain 2 book. I stole your thoughts and tried to channel your writing and your book on Billick and the Ravens when I did it. And Steve Bisciotti got a copy of the book, read the book, and when I saw him, the only thing he said is, had a couple of typos in it. Like, literally, no feedback at all, nothing on anything.
I mean, that's usually what you get. You know, in fact, I wrote a column last Sunday on Jay Wright in Villanova. And Jay, I've known Jay forever, since he was one of Rolly Massimino's assistants back in the 80s. And he wrote me a really sweet note about, you know, how much he enjoyed the piece and how, my insight into competition is unique and how, you know, he appreciates our friendship. And I wrote him back and I said, you know, Jay, if I had $1 for every note I've gotten like this throughout my career from people I've written about, I'd have about $8.
Well,
and it's pretty close to true.
Well, yeah, especially if you're trying to peel away at the onion and the truth. John Feinstein joining us. A couple little thoughts here on UMBC. Let's start with that because you've been around them a little bit. The upshot of winning that kind of a game last year that everybody was so excited about.
Well, I think the biggest thing, I mean, obviously it's great for the school because people now know what UMBC is. They know what the four letters stand for. There was a lot of press about what a great academic school it's become under Freeman Hrabowski. I am not a fan of college presidents, Nestor. I think most of them are glorified fundraisers who, you know, when one of them says, let me tell you the truth, I assume they're lying. But Freeman is an exception to that. He's brilliant. He was an advisor, as I'm sure you know, to President Obama. He likes to call himself a math geek. At the age of 12, he marched in Birmingham, Alabama with Dr. Martin Luther King and went to jail at the age of 12 for being part of that march. I mean, he's an extraordinary man. And the school and Dr. Hrabowski got a lot of attention. But from Ryan Odom's point of view, the most important thing was it gets him into living rooms and recruiting. Because now when they start to recruit a kid, the first question is, what is UMBC? Everybody knows now what and who UMBC is. People know what league they're in. People know who they compete against. A lot of people saw that Vermont game when Jairus Lyles hit the winning shot. So in that way, it's a huge boost. And look, they're struggling a little bit this year. You can't lose K.J. Mora and Jairus Lyles, who not only were senior guards, but were fantastic senior guards, and not feel the effect of that. And they're still kind of feeling their way in the America East. They had an unbelievable win Saturday against Albany. Classic story that down 2, 20 seconds to go, Ryan Odom puts Ricky Council back in the game, who had taken one shot, missed it, and then played 7 minutes. And he puts him back in. Not only puts him back in, but calls a play for him. And Ricky Council's open. He hits a three from the corner. They win the game. I said to Ryan afterwards, that was either the dumbest move I've ever seen a coach make or the most brilliant. And I guess since he hit the shot, it was brilliant. But Ryan has that kind of feel for the game. And they're not the same team they were a year ago because they don't have Mora and Lyles, but they're very competitive. And if you look back to where they were before Ryan got there 3 years ago, that alone is a huge step in the right direction.
Well, I can rip the scab off of the Ray Lewis, Joe Flacco, Gary Williams thing with you, or I could just say, hey, how about the Terps? not so good in East Lansing. There's a lot of not so good going into East Lansing.
Right.
I'm wondering where they're going to be in March and where the measurement of this team is, because they got 3 really good players, and they feel like they play well together. They got a nice rotation off the bench. I love Lindo. He's the modern-day Mouton for me. And I like this team. I'm circling the days on the calendar and really looking forward to watching the games, even next week when I'm at the Super Bowl. They're going to play in March, and I hope they play well. We'll see when we get there, but they're going to play in March, and for that, I'm grateful.
Well, that's progress, isn't it? Because in Mark Turgeon's first 7 seasons, they've only played in the tournament 3 times, and those were the 3 years Melo Trimble was on the team. Not a coincidence in my mind. I thought they were disappointing last year. They had talent last year too, with Herter, who's playing very well in the NBA, and Fernando, who was just a freshman, granted, and Cowan, and didn't come close to making the tournament. They are going to make the tournament this year. You're right. The 5 freshmen have played remarkably well. The key thing they've been doing is winning close games, which they didn't do the last couple of years. Maryland would get in a close game, and you go, okay, how are they going to lose it? This year, most of the time, since conference play began, anyway, they've won those close games. Michigan State and Michigan are the 2 best teams in the Big Ten. They might be 2 of the best four teams in the country. They're both good enough to go to the Final Four. I think Maryland's probably the 3rd best team in the league, and that should put them in pretty good position going into March. They should get a pretty decent seed.
Tiger Woods going to win a major?
I don't know. The honest answer is I don't know. I don't think about it that much. I don't really care that much, to be honest with you, Nestor.
30 seconons on golf. What
know.
do you think about going into this year? You love golf so much. 30 seconds.
I want Rory McIlroy to finish off the Grand Slam by winning the Masters. I'd love to see Phil Mickelson finish his by winning the U.S. Open. I'd love to see Jordan Spieth finish his by winning the PGA. There are some really, really good young players. Great story last Sunday when Adam Long, who I'd never heard of before Sunday, wins at the Bob Hope or whatever they call it now. I look for those kind of stories. I don't really care that much about what Tiger Woods does, and part of that's the iconoclast in me, like Mike Mussina, because everybody else is living and dying on every one of his swings. I don't.
John Feinstein joining us here. The book was Living on the Black. You working on a book right now? You got anything in progress?
Yeah, I'm actually, Quarterback came out in November, and it's done very nicely, gotten very good reviews. I'm happy to report. And I'm working on a book on the kind of book I love. It's on college basketball players, coaches, teams that aren't in the spotlight, that aren't on ESPN all the time. So, for example, tomorrow night I'm going down to see High Point play at Longwood. High Point is coached by Tubby Smith, who once won a national championship at Kentucky. And Longwood is now coached by Griff Aldridge, who was with Ryan Odom the last 2 years at UMBC and spent 20 years as a lawyer after he graduated from college before deciding he wanted to coach basketball. So those are the kind of stories I love to do, as you know.
Well, High Point's a special place. Nito Keebean, right? And I got friends that have kids down there and stuff. So enjoy. I like Tubby as well. So nice to know Tubby's still out there teaching and educating young people. John, take care of yourself. Always appreciate the time as well as the wisdom, and always enjoy reading your stuff, man. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Nestor.
John Feinstein joining us here. He's doing some UMBC stuff, still running around Maryland college basketball, doing golf and Tubby and Mike Mussina and mixing things up. Always good. You can find him out on Twitter. You can find me out on Twitter. I follow him. It's fun to follow him as well. You can find me out on the buy at Toyota.com Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Dallas and Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports. Thanks, John. Gratitude.